Let's talk about the various laws that you need to know for the series 63, 65, and 66. So let's start from the beginning. You have the Securities Act of 1933, required registration of securities except for securities that are exempt. So we're talking about like treasuries, munis. They created a carve out for Reg Ds, right? For Reg D private placement. So that people, they call that the Paper Act, right? That has to do with primary issues, meaning companies raising money for the first time. Then you have the Securities Exchange Act of 1934. They call it the People Act. So one of the main things it did is created the SEC, because you think about it, Securities Exchange Commission, Securities Exchange Act, right? It created exchanges or secondary markets for individual investors to resell the securities they bought from issuers. Regulates broker-dealers, created exchanges, basically secondary markets in simple terms. Now we move on to the Investment Company Act of 1940 and the Investment Advisors Act of 1940. So the Investment Company Act of 1940 created various investment companies, or basically pooled funds, pooled products that allowed for easy diversification. Because I mean, if you want to diversify, you really need a lot of money in order to have a well-balanced portfolio. So it's much easier to just buy a share of a mutual fund or an ETF in order to diversify. So under the Investment Company Act of 1940, they only created basically face amount certificates, which are old-timey. I don't even know if many exist anymore. They almost behave like zero coupon bonds, where you put up, X amount of money and you get Y back, or you pay X amount of money over a few months and you get Y back, right? Then there was also unit investment trusts, which are fixed portfolio, fixed termination, no investment advisor, and they're a little more tax efficient because there's no like active management. They're just kind of monitored, not managed. So, no 12B1 fee, nothing like that. And then you created management companies that split up into open-end funds and closed-end funds. Back in the day, the only type of open fund was a mutual fund. Then later on, ETFs came out in the 90s. Then you had closed-end funds. Open-end funds, they're just open to new money in the sense that you buy it from the issuer, right? You could create more and more shares. With closed-end funds, you have a fixed number of shares, so you have to buy it and sell it in the secondary market, right? Now we move on to, we move ahead to the Investment Advisors Act of 1940. Required registration of federally covered investment advisors, created certain rules like, for example, that if you're only advising on U.S. government securities, you're excluded from the definition of an investment advisor. If you're only advising insurance companies, you're exempt, which is slightly different from having to register with the SEC. Created rules behind like brochures, Form ADV. Also created. So we talked about registration of investment advisors, advises business for compensation, exempted lawyers, accountants, teachers, engineers if the advice is incidental, right? Talked about fees. Yeah, those are really the main ones. I might have missed one, but it just kind of flew out of my head. So another one, a later act, the next act that I want to talk about is the Uniform Securities Act of 1956. So 1956, basically it created a model law. It's a model state law for different states to implement, right? There's a concept called blue sky regulation, which applies to state regulation. The reason they call that is because before that, they used to put out securities in the states that were, the only legitimacy to them were like they were pie in the sky, right? That's kind of the idea. And it created a model state law for regulations, and different states chose to adopt it and adopt different parts of it, right? Then we move on to the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, aka ERISA. Before ERISA, what companies could do is the retirement plans were held in-house. So when the company was in trouble, the CEO, the first place they would dip into would be the pension plans of the companies. And obviously, plenty of people where they might have worked for the company for 50 years, they ended up with nothing, right? Outside of those are really the main ones. So Act of 33, Act of 34, IAA Act of 40, Investment Company Act of 40, Uniform Securities Act of 1956, ERISA of 1974. I mean, there's other ones too, like Dodd-Frank, Glass-Steagall, Patriot Act, right? Bank Secrecy Acts, all sorts of stuff like that. But if you have the other ones, if you have a pretty good understanding of the other ones, you should be in pretty good shape. Still can't think of what I was going to say about the IAA Act of 40. I'm trying to remember. I think we talked about that the exclusions. Oh, performance-based fees. That if you want to charge performance-based fees, you have to be a qualified client, 1.1 million in AUM or 2.2 million in net worth, and you're allowed to charge stuff like a fulcrum fee, which basically allows you to basically, let's say if you beat the S&P or beat a certain market index, you can get paid the performance over that. So hope that makes sense. Please like and subscribe and listen for more. Thank you very much. Have a great day.